The sun was just beginning to rise over the city when she arrived at the airport. Her life was always busy, always moving, and traveling had become second nature to her. She was a CEO, one of the youngest in the country to lead a Fortune 500 company. Yet she had a quiet way about her that made people trust her, admire her, and follow her lead without even noticing it. Today, she was on her way to a critical meeting with international investors, a meeting that could shape the future of her company. Even though her mind was focused on contracts, proposals, and schedules, she still noticed the small details, the way the airport smelled in the morning, the sound of rolling suitcases echoing against the tile floors, and the faint hum of early morning announcements. She approached the VIP lounge with a sense of calm. Unlike many, she didn't let the status or the luxury define her. For her, it was simply a place to work quietly, enjoy a cup of coffee, and prepare mentally for what was ahead. The lounge was almost empty at this early hour, save for a few travelers sipping on juice and scrolling through their phones. She nodded politely to the receptionist, flashed her ID, and stepped inside. The room was quiet, comfortable, and familiar. She settled into a seat by the window, opened her laptop, and began reviewing her notes for the meeting. Her focus was sharp. Every word, every detail mattered. Meanwhile, on the other side of the airport, the staff of her flight were preparing for boarding. They moved with efficiency, checking seats, confirming reservations, and running through their usual procedures. There was a sense of routine, a repetition that came with the job, but beneath that routine, there was a subtle hierarchy, a sense of who mattered more in the eyes of the world. She did not yet know that this routine would soon be disrupted by a moment that no one in the lounge could ignore. When boarding was announced, she walked calmly to the gate. She held her boarding pass lightly in one hand, her carry-on in the other. She was aware of the people around her, noticing the small gestures of impatience, the whispers of excitement, and the tired eyes of those who had traveled all night. She remained composed, acknowledging the flight attendants with a polite nod and smile. She knew her place on the plane, her seat carefully assigned for comfort and convenience, but also because she had spent years building a reputation that gave her certain privileges without needing to demand them. As she stepped onto the plane, the familiar smell of leather and polished metal welcomed her. She made her way down the aisle, her eyes scanning for her seat. When she arrived, she saw it, her VIP seat, wide, comfortable, and perfectly positioned. She placed her bag in the overhead compartment and settled in, letting herself relax just a little. It had been a long morning, and the small comfort of a seat that felt like her own was a welcome relief. She adjusted her jacket, took a deep breath, and began to mentally go over her presentation one last time. Moments later, a commotion near the aisle caught her attention. A passenger, visibly frustrated and speaking in a demanding tone, approached the seat she had just settled into. The flight attendants immediately moved toward the passenger, their expressions polite but uneasy. The CEO looked up, recognizing the situation before it fully unfolded. The passenger, a man who appeared to expect special treatment, had somehow assumed that this seat was available for him. The staff, without a word of confirmation, began gesturing toward her, signaling that she should move. Her heart sank, not with anger but with disbelief. She remained calm. She was not someone who reacted impulsively or with aggression. She simply said, "Excuse me, this is my seat." Her voice was steady, controlled, yet there was an unmistakable firmness. The flight attendants paused, glanced at her boarding pass, and then at the passenger. The passenger waved them off, insisting he needed the seat. One of the attendants hesitated, then politely but firmly said, "Sir, please have a seat elsewhere," as if that should resolve everything. But the passenger was persistent. He insisted, raising his voice slightly, and the staff seemed torn, unsure how to handle the situation. Passengers around them began to notice. Some shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to intervene. Others simply watched, waiting to see what would happen. There was a quiet tension in the air, a sense that something important was unfolding, even if no one fully understood it yet. She felt the weight of the moment, not because she wanted confrontation, but because she knew that how she handled it would set the tone for everything that followed. She took a deep breath, maintaining her composure, and repeated calmly, "This is my assigned seat. My boarding pass clearly shows it." Her eyes met the attendants, conveying a quiet confidence that demanded recognition. The staff, though professional, seemed uncertain. They looked at each other, then back at the passenger, then at her. The situation was delicate, and the air felt thick with tension. Other passengers whispered among themselves, some sympathetic, others confused. She could feel the eyes of the cabin on her, yet she did not falter. She had faced challenges before, in boardrooms and meetings where stakes were high and tempers could flare, and she knew that patience and clarity were more powerful than anger. The passenger, sensing that he was not going to get his way easily, huffed and moved to another section, muttering under his breath. The flight attendants, still a little flustered, returned to their positions, their movements slightly hesitant as they resumed preparations for takeoff. She let out a quiet sigh, not of relief but of recognition that small victories often came quietly and without fanfare. She adjusted her seat, leaned back slightly, and allowed herself a moment to reflect. As the plane began to taxi, she thought about the morning, about the work that awaited her, and about the unexpected challenges that life often threw her way. She had learned over the years that dignity and professionalism were powerful tools, sometimes more powerful than authority or money. She looked around the cabin, noticing the people who had observed the incident, some nodding subtly in acknowledgement of her composure. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had handled a delicate situation with grace. The flight continued smoothly, but she remained aware of the subtle dynamics in the cabin. She understood that moments like these were not just about a seat on a plane. They were reflections of broader societal patterns, and how one responded could set an example for everyone else. She opened her laptop again, reviewed her notes, and mentally prepared for the meeting ahead. Even in the midst of disruption, she found focus, turning a potentially uncomfortable experience into a moment of clarity and reflection. As the plane reached cruising altitude, she allowed herself to relax further. She thought about the people who had supported her journey, the mentors who had guided her, and the experiences that had shaped her resilience. This incident, minor though it might seem to some, was a reminder of the importance of patience, dignity, and quiet strength. She looked out the window at the clouds, the city shrinking below, and felt a sense of calm determination. Whatever challenges awaited her at her destination, she knew she could face them with the same poise and confidence she had displayed today. Passengers continued with their routines, some reading, others sleeping, yet the air still carried a subtle undercurrent of what had occurred. She did not dwell on it, choosing instead to focus on her work, on her thoughts, and on the power of handling situations with composure. The flight for now was uneventful, but the morning's events had already left an impression that would ripple beyond the cabin, and in her mind she quietly acknowledged that sometimes the smallest acts of standing firm could have the most profound consequences. The plane had barely leveled off when the incident began to weigh on her thoughts. It wasn't just a seat. It was about recognition, respect, and the subtle ways people judged her before even knowing who she was. She opened her laptop again, attempting to focus on the presentation slides, but her mind wandered back to the passenger and the staff. She thought about how quickly the situation escalated, and how easily people allowed assumptions to guide their actions. She had handled it with calm, but inside she felt the tension of knowing that moments like this were not isolated. They reflected patterns she had faced throughout her life. Nearby, the passengers whispered quietly. A woman with a notebook glanced over, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and sympathy. A young man, earbuds in, had paused his music and watched the exchange, unsure if he should intervene or stay silent. Every small interaction seemed magnified by the quiet of the cabin, where even whispers felt louder. She noticed it all, quietly observing human reactions, the way people measured each other, and the way courage often remained hidden in plain sight. As she adjusted her seat, the flight attendant who had insisted she move earlier approached, her expression awkward. "Ma'am," she began, voice soft. "I just want to apologize for the confusion earlier." The CEO looked up, meeting her eyes, and nodded slightly. "Thank you," she said calmly, careful not to make the interaction about blame. She understood that people often acted out of habit or fear, and confrontation rarely solved deeper issues immediately. The staff seemed nervous, unsure how to proceed with a passenger who had shown so much composure under pressure. The CEO sensed their discomfort but chose not to press it. She had learned that patience often revealed more than anger could. She shifted her focus back to her work, typing quickly, reviewing data, and preparing for the conversation with investors that would soon define the trajectory of her company. She reminded herself that life had a way of testing resolve in unexpected ways, and today had been a small but sharp reminder. The flight continued, and she allowed herself a moment to look around. The cabin, filled with people from all walks of life, seemed peaceful now, but she could feel the subtle ripple left by the earlier tension. People had noticed her calm, the way she stood firm without raising her voice. She had learned that strength often lay in quiet determination, in holding one's ground with dignity and clarity. She thought about her own journey, the countless meetings, negotiations, and public appearances where she had to assert herself without causing unnecessary conflict. This moment on the plane was just another example of the lessons life had taught her. Minutes passed, and the calm of cruising altitude provided a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the impact of bias, how assumptions often shaped interactions before facts could speak for themselves. She had faced such moments in boardrooms, in meetings with potential clients, and even in casual networking events. Yet this situation was different. It was visible to strangers, passengers who had no personal investment in her career. And yet the reaction of the staff had revealed a truth she knew all too well. She could feel a quiet fire within her, not anger, but a determination to ensure accountability, not just for herself but for the broader principle of fairness. As she sat there, she noticed a young couple a few rows ahead whispering to each other. Their expressions were a mix of surprise and admiration. She wondered if they realized how much courage it took to remain composed in the face of subtle injustice. People often underestimated the strength required to assert oneself calmly, without theatrics or loud confrontation. She took a deep breath and focused on her slides, reminding herself that professionalism was her strongest tool. Then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the airline's corporate office acknowledging her earlier complaint. She read it carefully, noting the polite but formal tone, promising an internal review. She felt a small sense of relief, but knew that words alone were not enough. She drafted a response, ensuring it was firm yet professional. She emphasized the importance of fairness, accountability, and proper training. Her fingers moved quickly over the screen, carefully choosing each word. She did not want retaliation, but she wanted meaningful action, a promise that this incident would not simply fade away. The cabin crew seemed more aware now, moving with extra attentiveness. She noticed the subtle changes in their demeanor, the way they checked the overhead compartments with more care, the way their smiles carried a hint of apology. She did not require gratitude, but she recognized the human side of their response. People often made mistakes, and she believed in allowing growth through awareness and reflection. Yet she also understood that accountability was necessary, and the situation required more than small gestures. Passengers began settling into the rhythm of the flight. A mother rocked her infant, humming softly, while a businessman scrolled through his tablet and a student leaned back, headphones on. Life continued around her, ordinary and uninterrupted, yet she felt the significance of what had occurred. It was a reminder of how quickly assumptions could lead to misjudgment, how easily authority could be overlooked based on appearance or preconceived notions. She thought about her role as a CEO, not just in her company but as a public figure, someone whose actions could inspire others and set an example for how to navigate challenges with grace. She reflected on her early career, remembering moments when she had been underestimated, ignored, or dismissed. Each challenge had shaped her, teaching her the power of quiet persistence and measured responses. Today was another lesson, a real-life example that even in seemingly small situations, principles mattered. She reviewed her presentation notes again, ensuring her focus remained sharp, her mind ready for the high-stakes meeting ahead. The plane hit a slight turbulence, and passengers gripped armrests or held cups of coffee with a little extra care. She remained steady, unaffected by the minor jolt, a metaphor for the way she handled life's unexpected shifts. The earlier incident had been a disturbance, but it had not shaken her inner stability. She knew that maintaining composure under pressure was a skill honed over years of practice and experience, and moments like these were tests of character more than convenience. Minutes stretched into quiet conversation, and she overheard snippets of discussion around her. Some passengers were clearly talking about the incident, exchanging opinions in hushed tones. She did not mind. She understood that people were processing what they had seen, noticing the power of calm authority in the face of bias. She reflected on the subtle yet profound ways people influenced each other. One person's dignity could ripple outward, affecting attitudes and perceptions in ways that were hard to measure but deeply real. She allowed herself to look out the window again. The clouds drifted past in serene, endless motion. For a moment she felt a sense of detachment from the tension below, a reminder that life continued beyond small conflicts. Yet she knew that this particular moment would not simply vanish. The incident was now recorded in memory, in perception, and in action. She understood the importance of following up, of ensuring that the airline would take meaningful steps to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. She typed another note to the corporate office, elaborating on the importance of training, awareness, and accountability. Her words were firm but not aggressive, assertive without being confrontational. She knew that communication mattered as much as action, and that the tone of a message could influence outcomes as powerfully as decisions themselves. She reread the note carefully, adjusted a few phrases, and finally hit send, feeling a quiet sense of agency. The flight continued, and she settled deeper into her thoughts. She considered the passengers who had witnessed the exchange, imagining the lessons they might take with them. Perhaps they had seen strength without force, dignity without anger, and calm without compromise. Perhaps they would remember how one person could assert herself with clarity and fairness, even when circumstances seemed stacked against her. It was a reminder that influence often came in subtle, quiet forms. As the hours passed, she allowed herself a small moment of rest. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and reflected on the morning's events. She was proud of how she had handled the situation, not out of vanity, but because she knew that how one responded under pressure defined character. The incident had been a test of patience, focus, and resilience, and she had navigated it with grace. She felt ready to face whatever awaited her at the destination, confident in her abilities, her principles, and her strength. She opened her laptop again one last time, reviewing her notes for the meeting. The plane hummed steadily around her, passengers immersed in their own routines, unaware of the broader implications of what had occurred. She smiled slightly, knowing that life had a way of turning small moments into meaningful experiences. Today had been a reminder that dignity, clarity, and patience were powerful tools, and that even in the face of bias or misunderstanding, calm and assertiveness could pave the way for respect, recognition, and change. As the plane continued its journey, she knew the situation could not simply be left as it was. The incident had been more than an inconvenience. It had revealed how easily assumptions could override fairness. She opened her phone and began to type a detailed message to the airline's corporate office. Every word mattered. She explained exactly what had happened, noting the disregard of the staff, the unnecessary insistence of the passenger, and how quickly bias had dictated action. She was firm but polite, demanding accountability and clarity on the steps the airline would take to ensure such a situation would not happen again. She did not send the message immediately. Instead, she reread it, imagining how the words would be received. She wanted to be persuasive without being confrontational. She wanted the airline to understand the seriousness of the situation, not just as a complaint, but as an opportunity for them to learn and improve. After a few edits, she sent it and leaned back, watching the cabin around her. Passengers were quietly going about their routines, unaware that a storm had briefly passed through their midst and left a lesson behind. Shortly after, she noticed that the flight attendants had become more attentive. It was subtle, a quick smile here, a nod of acknowledgement there, but it reflected a shift. She did not seek praise, but she recognized that the power of calm authority could influence others without force. She reflected on how often people allowed their assumptions to dictate behavior, and how rare it was for someone to respond with quiet composure that demanded recognition and respect. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a reply from the corporate office. They thanked her for her message and promised an internal review. She read carefully, noting the tone and phrasing. It was polite, but she knew that words alone were not enough. She drafted another response, explaining her expectation for meaningful action and emphasizing the importance of accountability, training, and recognition of bias. She stressed that it was not only a personal issue, but one that reflected on the airline's reputation and values. As she typed, she overheard a few passengers quietly discussing the incident. Some expressed surprise at how calmly she had handled the situation, others expressed support, and a few whispered questions about what she would do next. She smiled faintly to herself. This was a reminder that one person's composure could influence an entire environment. Even small actions, handled with grace, could ripple outward in ways that were not immediately visible. She took a moment to reflect on her own journey. She had faced countless challenges as a Black woman in business. Each experience had required patience, strategy, and persistence. Today's incident was different, but the lesson was the same. Responding with dignity and clarity often achieved more than confrontation or anger. She reviewed her upcoming meeting notes, prepared her talking points, and reminded herself that life often tested resilience in unexpected ways. The flight reached cruising altitude, and she allowed herself a few quiet minutes of observation. She watched the interaction between staff and passengers, noting small gestures that reflected respect and recognition. She thought about how often these subtle actions could make a difference in someone's day, how a nod, a smile, or a polite acknowledgement could prevent misunderstandings or conflict. It was a lesson she carried in her own leadership style. People responded best to fairness, clarity, and integrity. Minutes later, she received another message from the corporate office, asking for more details and requesting a formal account of events. She complied immediately, writing a precise, thorough account, describing the sequence of events, the reactions of staff, and the attitude of the passenger. She included the boarding pass, video timestamps, and any supporting information that would strengthen her case. She sent the report and leaned back, feeling a sense of accomplishment. She had taken control of the situation not through confrontation, but through careful, deliberate action. The cabin settled into a quiet rhythm, and she allowed herself to relax slightly. She reflected on how small actions could create meaningful change. Today had demonstrated that assumptions could be challenged, that dignity could assert itself even in uncomfortable circumstances, and that accountability was possible when addressed thoughtfully and persistently. She thought about the young people she had mentored, the colleagues she had guided, and the employees who looked to her example for leadership. Moments like these were teaching opportunities, not only for those directly involved, but for everyone who witnessed the situation. She glanced around and noticed the subtle expressions of passengers who had observed the incident. Some nodded slightly, others whispered in quiet admiration, and a few gave her small, encouraging smiles. She did not seek recognition, but she understood the power of influence. How she responded in a moment of unfair treatment could resonate far beyond her own experience, creating awareness and reflection in others. It was a reminder that leadership was not confined to offices and boardrooms. It existed in everyday moments, in choices, and in actions taken with integrity and clarity. As the flight continued, she began thinking about the broader implications of her experience. She realized that many people, regardless of position, encountered situations where bias or assumption interfered with fairness. She thought about how courage, patience, and clear communication could transform such moments into opportunities for change. She considered sharing her experience with colleagues, peers, and even the public, not for attention but as a lesson in assertiveness, dignity, and effective problem-solving. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a note from the airline's regional manager, expressing concern and assuring that a thorough review would take place. She appreciated the response but remained cautious. She knew that promises did not always translate into action, and she intended to follow up to ensure accountability. She drafted a brief acknowledgement, thanking them for the prompt attention, and reiterating her expectation for meaningful resolution. During this time, she also took the opportunity to observe human behavior more closely. She noticed how people responded to authority, how subtle gestures indicated respect or hesitation, and how moments of tension revealed underlying assumptions and biases. It was a lesson not only in the present situation, but in understanding human interaction more broadly. She reflected on how these observations could inform her leadership style, guiding her approach to mentorship, team management, and corporate decision-making. Hours passed, and she continued to prepare for her meeting. The earlier incident, while stressful, had sharpened her focus. She reviewed her slides, rehearsed her talking points, and considered potential questions and challenges. She understood that the ability to remain composed under pressure was a critical skill, one that influenced perception and outcomes more than immediate reactions or displays of emotion. Her calm, measured approach had already impacted those around her, creating an environment of awareness and respect. She thought about the passengers again. Some had witnessed the exchange firsthand, while others had caught fragments through whispers and glances. She considered the impressions left behind, the lessons learned silently by those observing. Moments of quiet strength could leave lasting impressions, shaping how people interacted with others and responded to unfair treatment in their own lives. She felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had turned a difficult situation into an example of composure, clarity, and dignity. As the flight continued toward its destination, she allowed herself a small moment of reflection. She considered her responsibility not only as a CEO, but as a person whose actions could influence perceptions, inspire others, and create change. She thought about the ways she had navigated bias and assumption throughout her life and career, and how today's experience added another chapter to that journey. She realized that accountability, patience, and clear communication were tools as powerful as any contract or business strategy she had ever employed. Finally, she reviewed her notes one last time, confident in her preparedness for the meeting ahead. She knew that the incident would follow her, but not as a burden. It was a reminder of the importance of principle, integrity, and strength in the face of unfair treatment. She allowed herself a moment of calm, appreciating the lessons learned, the awareness created, and the subtle changes she had already influenced. The plane continued its course, steady and assured, much like her own resolve, carrying her toward the next challenge with clarity, dignity, and unwavering focus. As the plane began its descent, a quiet tension lingered in the cabin. She could feel that something was about to unfold, though she remained calm and composed. Her phone buzzed with a message from the airline's head office. They had reviewed the footage from the flight and were arranging an emergency meeting with the regional management team to address the incident. She read the message carefully, noting the tone and urgency. They acknowledged that the staff had mishandled the situation and admitted that immediate action was necessary. She allowed herself a small nod of satisfaction, knowing that her persistence and composure had already made an impact. Landing was smooth and the passengers began to disembark. She stayed in her seat until the crowd thinned, allowing her to avoid unnecessary attention. Once she stood, the flight attendants who had previously been tense gave her polite nods, but she remained focused on the larger issue. Today was not about apology or recognition from them. It was about accountability and systemic change. She walked confidently through the cabin, her presence commanding attention without a word. Her demeanor was steady, unshaken, and purposeful. Outside the plane, a small group of airline executives waited, along with a few managers who had been briefed on the situation. She was escorted to a quiet room where they could discuss the matter without interruptions. The regional manager, a woman in her 40s with a calm demeanor, began the conversation. "We have reviewed the incident on your flight," she said. "It is clear that the staff did not handle the situation correctly. We are taking immediate action to address this." The CEO listened carefully, her expression neutral but attentive. She had expected words, but she wanted action. She knew that statements without consequences meant little. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," she said, "but I want to ensure that this leads to meaningful change, not only for myself, but for every passenger who deserves respect and fairness." The executives nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. They outlined the steps they intended to take: the immediate suspension of the staff involved, a review of training procedures, and a meeting with the airline's human resources department to discuss improvements in bias awareness and customer service standards. She asked detailed questions about timelines, follow-up measures, and accountability, ensuring that no step would be overlooked or delayed. She emphasized that this was an opportunity for the airline to demonstrate genuine commitment to equity and professionalism. As the meeting continued, she remained composed, listening to explanations, providing guidance, and asserting expectations. She was careful to remain firm without being confrontational, knowing that her approach could influence the effectiveness of the response. The executives realized that this was not just about a single flight. It was about setting a precedent, creating awareness, and ensuring that similar incidents would be prevented in the future. Meanwhile, news of the incident began circulating discreetly among airline employees. Whispers spread through terminals, lounges, and staff rooms. Employees discussed the unusual situation, noting the CEO's calm demeanor and the airline's swift response. Some expressed surprise, others concern, and many reflected on how their own behavior and assumptions could impact passengers. The ripple effect of her actions was already evident, even before official statements were made, and outlined plans for training improvements. Media outlets picked up the story, highlighting the CEO's composure, professionalism, and the airline's rapid response. Social media buzzed with discussions about accountability, bias, and the power of calm assertion in challenging situations. She followed the developments quietly, appreciating the recognition but remaining focused on the brawl later that day. The airline issued a formal statement acknowledging the incident, apologizing for the mishandling, and announcing immediate disciplinary action against the staff involved. They emphasized their commitment to fairness, respect, and equitable impact. Today was not about personal attention. It was about ensuring that the system improved and that passengers would be treated fairly regardless of appearance, background, or assumptions. She reflected on the subtle power of composure, clarity, and persistence. A single person's response, grounded in dignity and principle, could inspire change far beyond the immediate moment. Passengers who had witnessed the original incident also shared their perspectives. Some posted comments online, expressing admiration for how the situation was handled. Others discussed the importance of accountability and customer service, sharing their own experiences with bias and unfair treatment. She read a few of these posts quietly, feeling a sense of connection to the broader conversation about respect, fairness, and human dignity. As evening approached, she finally left the airport, her mind still buzzing with reflections and observations. The day had been a reminder of how quickly assumptions could lead to misjudgment and how effective a calm, composed response could be. She thought about the airline staff, the passengers, and the executives she had met, recognizing that each person had a role in shaping outcomes. She believed that meaningful change required awareness, accountability, and consistent action, and today had provided a clear example of that principle in motion. She returned to her hotel, carrying with her a sense of quiet accomplishment. She prepared for her next meeting, confident that her focus and composure would carry through to the critical discussions ahead. Yet she also allowed herself to reflect on the day's events, considering the broader lessons about equity, respect, and the subtle ways individuals could influence systemic change. She knew that small moments often carried the greatest significance, and that her response today could inspire awareness, reflection, and action in others. That evening, she drafted a message to her team, sharing the experience in a professional context. She emphasized the importance of standing firm with dignity, communicating clearly, and demanding accountability when fairness was compromised. She reflected on the ripple effect of such actions, highlighting how leadership extended beyond offices and boardrooms into everyday moments where principle and integrity were tested. She reminded her team that influence was not measured solely by authority or position, but by the manner in which one handled challenges, advocated for fairness, and inspired change through composure and clarity. The story of the incident continued to develop over the next few days. The airline conducted internal investigations, interviewed staff, and implemented new training programs focused on equity and bias awareness. The CEO's approach became a model example for leadership in action, illustrating how calm, principled intervention could lead to tangible results. Passengers, employees, and observers alike took note of the importance of accountability and the impact of respectful, measured responses in difficult situations. Throughout this process, she remained grounded, focused on the broader lessons rather than personal recognition. She knew that change required patience, persistence, and strategic action. She also recognized the power of example. Her calm and assertive handling of the situation had already influenced staff behavior, passenger awareness, and corporate response. Today had demonstrated the profound impact of integrity, patience, and quiet determination in shaping outcomes and inspiring meaningful change. By the end of the week, the airline announced that all staff involved in mishandling the incident had been dismissed, and comprehensive measures were introduced to prevent similar occurrences. Media coverage highlighted the CEO's calm handling of the situation, the airline's accountability, and the broader implications for customer service and equity. The story served as a reminder that even small acts of composure, principle, and assertive communication could create ripple effects that extend far beyond a single moment, influencing policies, perceptions, and practices in meaningful ways. After the airline had taken immediate action, dismissing the staff involved and implementing new training programs, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. It was not satisfaction born from personal victory, but from knowing that a principle she valued, fairness and respect, had been upheld. She reflected on the journey from the moment she boarded the plane to the present, realizing that patience, clarity, and composure had turned a difficult situation into an example of meaningful change. Back at her office, she found herself thinking about the broader impact of the incident. Emails and messages poured in from colleagues, peers, and even strangers who had heard about the story. Many praised her handling of the situation, admiring the calm and dignity she maintained. Some shared their own experiences with bias and unfair treatment, expressing how her actions had inspired them to handle challenges with similar composure. She responded thoughtfully, encouraging them to remain steadfast, communicate clearly, and always prioritize integrity over confrontation. She also reflected on the importance of setting examples in leadership. Her company had long emphasized the value of respect, fairness, and accountability, but this incident reinforced those lessons in a very public way. She knew that leadership was not only about managing teams or making business decisions, it was about embodying the values one wished to see in the world. Her response had demonstrated that calm and measured action could create awareness, influence behavior, and inspire change far beyond the immediate situation. In the weeks following the incident, she was invited to speak at conferences and panel discussions about leadership, diversity, and equity. She shared her experience on the plane, highlighting the lessons learned and the importance of handling challenging moments with dignity. Her speeches resonated with audiences who appreciated her thoughtful approach and practical insights. She emphasized that courage did not always mean confrontation. Sometimes it meant standing firm with composure, communicating clearly, and ensuring accountability through careful action. The airline continued to follow up with her, providing updates on how their new training programs were being implemented and how staff behavior had changed. She appreciated their transparency, knowing that real change required consistent monitoring and reinforcement. She offered suggestions based on her own observations, focusing on practical strategies for reducing bias, increasing awareness, and improving customer service. Her involvement was not about personal attention. It was about creating lasting improvements for the benefit of everyone who interacted with the airline. Meanwhile, the story continued to circulate in the media, highlighting the CEO's professionalism and the airline's accountability. Social media discussions praised her handling of the situation, emphasizing the broader lessons about dignity, fairness, and quiet strength. She noticed that many people were discussing how they could apply these lessons in their own lives, whether in workplace settings, public interactions, or personal challenges. The ripple effect of her actions was tangible, influencing attitudes, conversations, and perceptions far beyond the original incident. She also took time to mentor her own team, sharing insights from the experience. She encouraged them to remain calm under pressure, to communicate clearly, and to demand accountability when fairness was compromised. She explained that leadership was as much about influence and example as it was about authority, and that how one responded in moments of challenge often defined character more than immediate results. Her team listened attentively, appreciating the real-life example she provided, and they carried these lessons into their own professional and personal interactions. In quiet moments, she reflected on the passengers who had witnessed the incident on the plane. She imagined the small, lasting impressions left by her composure and clarity. Some had likely never experienced such calm assertiveness before, and the lesson was subtle yet powerful. One person, standing firm in principle, could influence the behavior and attitudes of many. She understood that change often began with awareness, and awareness often began with example. As months passed, the airline continued to report improvements in customer service and staff training outcomes. Feedback from passengers indicated that they noticed a significant shift in how staff interacted with travelers. Complaints decreased and positive comments increased, demonstrating that accountability and training had a measurable impact. She quietly celebrated this progress, knowing that her actions had contributed to meaningful, lasting change. She also noticed that her experience inspired conversations beyond the airline industry. Colleagues in other companies shared stories of similar incidents and asked for advice on handling them with dignity and professionalism. She emphasized that maintaining composure, documenting events, and seeking accountability through appropriate channels were key strategies. She encouraged them to approach challenges strategically, balancing firmness with respect, and ensuring that actions led to tangible outcomes rather than temporary resolution. Reflecting on her personal growth, she realized that this incident had strengthened her understanding of influence, leadership, and human behavior. She had navigated a potentially uncomfortable situation with grace, turned it into a teaching moment, and inspired others to act with integrity and courage. She understood that every challenge carried the potential for positive impact when approached thoughtfully and deliberately. In her private moments, she also considered the importance of systemic change. While individual actions were powerful, she knew that lasting impact required organizational and cultural adjustments. She felt a responsibility to use her experience to advocate for broader awareness of bias, equity, and accountability in professional and public settings. Her approach was measured, thoughtful, and deliberate, focused on fostering understanding rather than confrontation. The incident became a defining story in her career, not because it was sensational, but because it exemplified the principles she valued most. Her calm composure, clear communication, and insistence on accountability created a ripple effect that extended far beyond a single flight. She saw the results in improved airline policies, inspired conversations, and the awareness she had instilled in her colleagues and the public. As she continued her work, traveling, leading meetings, and mentoring her team, she carried with her the lessons from that day. She understood that integrity, dignity, and clear communication were tools of influence as powerful as any business strategy or leadership technique. She also recognized the subtle power of example, that by handling challenges thoughtfully and assertively, one could inspire change in ways that were lasting and meaningful. She looked back at the incident as a moment of quiet triumph, not for personal glory, but for the broader lessons it had imparted. The airline's swift action, the staff changes, and the training programs implemented were evidence that principled action mattered. Her reflection reinforced her belief that leadership extended beyond business decisions, influencing culture, behavior, and societal expectations in tangible ways. In the end, she understood that her experience was a reminder to herself and others that standing firm with dignity, communicating clearly, and ensuring accountability could create meaningful change. She knew that every individual had the capacity to influence their environment positively, and that integrity, patience, and clarity were the most effective tools for achieving lasting impact. The incident on the plane had become more than a story. It had become a lesson, a ripple and a catalyst for awareness, change, and inspiration that extended far beyond the confines of that single flight.